Boxing philosophy is about understanding. For example, how does Holyfield land his left hook? How does Canelo land his left hook to the body? And who owns the best jab in boxing? These questions, they open doors. They push us to explore the different elements of the sport, whether it's the punches, the timing, the rhythm. And there are also less visible layers, whether it's the glove size, the contracts, the psychology of victory, the psychology of defeat, and the unique environment that each trainer builds. Question: what truly makes a great trainer? Is it the strategy that they design, or is it the culture that they create in the gym? Boxing philosophy is about asking sharp questions, even when there are no clear answers. Because in the search for answers, understanding grows. The psychology of mental toughness in boxing, what separates champions from contenders. Question: what makes a boxer mentally tough? And are there levels? Are there levels to being mentally tough? Is it black and white, or is there like a scale? And what is that scale? Is it 1 to 10, 1 to 1,000, etc.? We could assume that every boxer has a degree of toughness just by stepping in the ring. But not every boxer is as tough as, say, Rocky Marciano. And here's another question: where does the toughness actually come from? Is it genetic, or is it environmental? And can we all be tough, or is it reserved for just like a chosen few? Let's get specific. Why was Rocky Marciano, the great Rocky Marciano, why was he so tough? For those that maybe don't know, Rocky Marciano engaged in extremely strenuous training. At the time, he would use punch bags of an extraordinary size. Was it the training that developed the toughness? Or was he already tough? Or was it a combination of both? Maybe it's impossible to qualify an answer to such a question. Here is a philosophical point. Toughness may not be a byproduct of being human. For example, a lion is a lion. Stay with me. Case in point, a lion of cowardice is still a lion. A lion of character and of bravery is still a lion. Why is this important and why is this relevant? Well, perhaps as humans, we are not innately brave. Perhaps we are not born brave. It seems natural to me that bravery is a conception that's nurtured. Also, additional to that, bravery and mental toughness could be like a choice. A coward, for example, makes a choice to be a coward, while a brave person makes a choice to be brave. Mental strength sits in the same context as bravery. So for me, there is a relationship between mental toughness and being brave. So for example, if you're not brave, you're not mentally tough, and vice versa. There's a clear relationship here. When I think of the bravest men in the ring, the bravest of the brave, I think of Rocky Marciano, I think of Evander Holyfield. So let's enter the Evander Holyfield context. So in 1992, Evander Holyfield fought Riddick Bowe. Evander was the unified champion, and Riddick Bowe was that hungry challenger. And it was an amazing fight. It was a brutal fight. In round 10, a right uppercut from Riddick Bowe had Evander in some serious trouble. However, Evander refused to go down, even though he was being hit with massive punches. Here's a question: what goes through someone's mind in this situation? What goes through someone's mind when they're in this type of pain? In the mind of a defeated person, they would look for a way out, and rationally, it's actually unreasonable to continue in those circumstances. But in the mind of the mentally tough person, they try and weather the storm because perhaps in their psychology, there is no way out. In other words, you're in a battle and you're trying not only to find a way to survive, you're trying to find a way to win. But what goes through one's mind in those difficult and painful moments? Interesting observation. After the fight, Evander Holyfield stated that he thought this was actually an opportunity to get to Bo. That is a mind of an optimist. That is the mind of a champion. Let's bring this back to boxing philosophy. In its rawest form, philosophy is the nature of reality. Of course, we can debate reality, but let's just assume a normal premise. And in that normal premise, the reality of the mentally strong is clearly different to the reality of the coward. If we all experience life in a particular way, the mentally strong have a different filter. They have a different language to the coward. And it's a language that I think we should admire. The language of the mentally strong, the language of the brave. Now, the great Mike Tyson had a trainer called Cus D'Amato. Apologies if I've mispronunciated that. Now, Cus advocated the idea that cowards and heroes are essentially the same in one sense. The only difference is that they make different decisions, i.e. the coward makes cowardly decisions while the hero or the brave make heroic and brave decisions. So when we take that philosophical framework, the mentally strong make heroic decisions, and that's the distinction. They're both human, the same way the lion is the lion. But why do people make those decisions? That's what fascinates me. This is my take from this. We can make decisions to be brave, or we can make decisions to be cowardly. If our decisions determine our reality, this means that we are potentially much stronger than we think. And fundamentally, our decisions under this premise is a very strong currency. Chris Eubank's fatal mistake. So when Chris Eubank Jr. fought Conor Benn, he effectively took a big risk, and this included the rehydration clause that would potentially impact his physical performance in the ring. Now, despite this, in the first fight, Chris Eubank Jr., he showed amazing heart. Despite suffering from dehydration post-fight, he gave what can only be called an epic performance. Truly, truly epic. In the last 2 rounds, figuratively speaking, he gritted his teeth and he let his hands go. It wasn't necessarily technical, but it was passionate. And remember, in the boxing world, the currency of passion is so respected. And the byproduct of passion is often entertainment. But perhaps the fatal mistake was this. Allegedly, in the negotiation process, the rehydration clause was also included in the rematch. So it's negotiated in the first fight, but also included in the rematch. And this technicality, this proved to be a fatal flaw. Chris Eubank Jr. had the mental strength to overcome the barriers of the first fight, and those barriers were significant. But in the second fight, he appeared flat, deflated, and depleted. That rehydration clause, I believe, was his most dangerous opponent. So dangerous. And let me just add a caveat here to be courteous. Conor Benn truly had a great performance. For example, he had an educated jab, really good feints, good body shots, particularly the straight right to the body, and he punched effectively through the target. However, despite this, the rehydration robbed Chris Eubank Jr., I believe, of his ability to perform effectively. However, it also had the knock-on effect of tainting Conor Benn's victory. Figuratively speaking, his painting should have been a masterpiece, but it was damaged. As Chris Eubank Jr. had the heart to fight, but he did not have the physical capability to perform in an effective manner. I want people to understand this. Hindsight bias is a dangerous thing. Why? Why is it dangerous? Because with hindsight bias, things become obvious when in the moment they were concealed in the shadows. That's why we have to be careful with hindsight bias. With that being said, allegedly the rehydration may have had an impact not just on his performance but also on other health issues for Chris Eubank Jr. Remember, this is all allegedly. I want to emphasize that. But if this premise is true, then the rehydration clause in the rematch was even stronger than the punch that put him on the canvas in the 12th round. What is the moral of this story? What is the moral? Perhaps part of the moral is the concept of effective negotiation, because in hindsight, the rematch was lost in the ineffective negotiation process. And perhaps the counter-argument may be that the rehydration clause was economically profitable. That's a fair assumption, but that formulates a very interesting question. And that question is money more important than legacy? Is money more important than legacy? And the main point I'm trying to make is that when you sign a contract, it's so important to negotiate effectively. Negotiate to be profitable, of course, in a capitalist society, that's important, but also negotiate to win, because winning is a very serious industry and it should always be respected. And the other lesson is to respect the unintended consequences of bad decisions. Because if you agree to a rehydration clause and you get sick, then you have been complicit in your own demise. So, in a sense, be careful. Be careful what you wish for, but even be more careful of what you negotiate. Could Jake Paul beat Anthony Joshua? In my opinion, this is just simply not a good question. Why? Why is it not a good question? Because it does not give us the appropriate context. So here may be a better question. What percentage is there of Jake Paul achieving victory over Anthony Joshua? And how could he do it? I think many of us have come to the conclusion that Jake Paul is a massive underdog. He's a massive underdog. And that premise is strong, I feel, because Anthony Joshua is a two-time heavyweight champion. So they're in different leagues. So when we think of Anthony Joshua, he has experience at the highest level, at the absolute highest level. Think of the fights with Usyk. Jake Paul has become a committed boxer, but he's not naturally a boxer. He started as a YouTuber, and Anthony Joshua's weight and his level, they are just simply at different levels. Now Jake Paul has some pedigree, but it does not match Joshua's pedigree. However, in theory, Jake Paul has a chance. Yes, in theory, let's talk about it. A counter right hand, a right hand set up through some feints or a short left hook, followed by a powerful overhand right to the temple. This, in theory, could be a knockout punch. But in reality, it's probably extremely unlikely. Think of this. Anthony Joshua has competed at the elite level. Here is a premise. Klitschko punches harder than Jake Paul. Klitschko has greater boxing intelligence than Jake Paul. He has a greater jab. But Jake Paul still has a chance. It just seems not to be a very good one. Similarly, when you do the lottery, you have a chance, but not a good chance of winning. But of course, there are variables here. Jake Paul, psychologically, or Jake Paul simply has nothing to lose. but everything to gain. Anthony Joshua has a lot to lose and not much to gain. There's something to gain, but not much to gain. And the currency of popularity, I think, is very strong here, as this fight will likely be watched by many, many millions. Of course, both warriors will be compensated generously for their time. But think of this. I wonder, what is the motivation? What is the motivation for Anthony Joshua here? This is something that I've been thinking about. Is the motivation simply a cultural impact? Is it to have a bigger cultural impact? Is the motivation to engage simply in another spectacular event? Or is the motivation to keep his name in the media? And by this, he generates more attention to his brand. Is it to keep his name in the algorithm? What is the intention here? What is the strategy? And here is the question. Is the risk worth the reward? And is there any serious risk, or is there any risk? Does Anthony Joshua's participation in this event affect his brand? Considering how quick algorithms work, how they shift and move, and how the boxing world works, maybe not. Maybe it won't affect his brand as long as he wins. Some may say it's another day at a different type of office. However, the outcome of the fight, the narrative bias from the media and the narrative bias from the fans, that of course will be interesting. And the fight itself, I think it holds like a twisted curiosity, because I'm actually curious to see how this all develops. Every now and then, I think of questions that I think are interesting. And the question, are boxers born or are they made? I think is a good question. Think of this. It's important to ask good questions. Why? Because when we ask good questions, we potentially get good understanding. It can define our reality. And this is the foundation. This is effectively the foundation of boxing philosophy. Let's think of some fighters. Let's take a fighter like Floyd Mayweather, which many of us are familiar with. Floyd Mayweather was built in the gym. He was a product of boxing wisdom, of boxing knowledge, which was like passed down from generations to generations. But think of this, his reflexes and his ability to see punches, I think is extraordinary. I think there is probably a genetic component here. It's not just entirely technical. Of course, Floyd's boxing intelligence is nurtured in the gym. There's no doubt about that. But his 20/20 vision, absolutely, from my perspective, seems to be a genetic gift. However, are there variables here? Because his defensive philosophy is definitely a product of teaching. It's a product of teaching. So within the Floyd Mayweather matrix, what do we see? We see good genetics, or we see great genetics, and we see a great environment. Now let's look at another great, the heavyweight Lennox Lewis. Some would argue one of the greatest jabs in boxing. Is the efficiency of Lewis's jab due to technique, or is it due to his reach and his genetics that determine the power and speed and accuracy behind the punch? Think of this again, the jab is surely a mixture of genetics and boxing environments. For example, Emanuel Stewart, the great Emanuel Stewart, often had fighters utilize their jab consistently and effectively, and that's important. This is a product of teaching, and it's a product of the boxing environment that he would nurture. In a simple sense, a boxer can be made and a boxer can be born. That to me is the equation. And great fighters are often a combination of both. they are born and they are nurtured through a process. To me, this seems to be the most logical answer. So in a way, in a simple sense, is explosive. He is technical. At first, when I first saw him, he reminded me of Manny Pacquiao. He has that intensity, that speed, and he has this capacity to really overwhelm his opponents. And whether it's the triple left hook or that explosive 1-2, Inoue mixes technique. He mixes technique with excellence. He entertains the crowd and he overwhelms his opponents. He is the truth and he deserves recognition. Many consider Inoue as the top 3 on the pound for pound list. That in itself is exceptional and it shows that he has elite caliber. He reads openings in a split second and he punishes every mistake. He carries that quiet menace, knowing that one shot can totally end the night. And there's patience behind his violence, a calm mind directing brutal precision. When Inoue steps through the ropes, you're not just watching a fight, you're watching a statement. This man is on an elite level. Now, before we move into the main sections, here is a quick caveat. I apologize in advance for any mispronunciation. So let's get started. What is mental strength? Or what does mental strength look like? That's probably a much better question. Now, when Muhammad Ali showed mental strength to endure punishing blows from George Foreman, Evander Holyfield showed mental strength when he took those blows from Riddick Bowe in round 10 of their first fight. Now, these two examples, they're extreme. They're of an extreme nature. But there is another chapter, or there is another element to mental strength. There is a mental strength, for example, to get through a training camp, a mental strength to maintain composure. There is a mental strength in trusting your power, trusting your technique, and trusting your trainer, trusting your corner, etc. And it can go on and on. Now, Inoue's mental strength, from my perspective, is in his calm, because he walks into hostile arenas and treats them like they're his own gym. He moves up in weight, faces bigger men, and never changes his expression, the ultimate poker face. There is a mental strength in how he waits for the perfect opening instead of trying to force the knockout. He's patient, but he's aggressive at the same time. There is a mental strength in how he gets clipped, resets his feet, and then comes back even stronger. He trusts his preparation so deeply that big fight pressure just becomes like another round of sparring. From my perspective, Inoue believes in his own power and he never tries to rush it. He never chases it. He lets it arrive on time. Inoue just doesn't break opponents up physically. He breaks their belief, and that is the mental strength at a higher level, or at least on a different level. So let's talk about the Nonito Donaire fight. Now, Nonito Donaire was a very popular name in boxing. I remember his power early in his career. I actually have this vague recollection of him, and I believed he knocked down an opponent even though the punch was blocked. So, Donaire had serious power. He was full of speed, and he was a multiple world champion, and because he was Filipino, they were comparing him to Manny Pacquiao. And Nonito Donaire was the underdog in the first fight, even though he had, that reputation and he had those accomplishments. Clearly his career was nearing its end. But he deeply, deeply tested Inoue in that fight, or in their first fight. In round 2, a right hand from Donaire damaged Inoue's orbital bone. And in rounds 4, and in rounds 5, and in rounds 9, Danair landed some big punches. Think of this. It's in these moments that we see our true character. And we might ask a question, do we quit? Do we survive, or do we try and find solutions? This is when it gets hard. This is where your psychology can get deeply affected. Your nature of reality suspended as you deal with a very, very strong opposing force. It's a powerful point. But Inoue walked through that jungle because he weathered that storm. He fought like a warrior. And Danair, another warrior, broke Inoue's nose and fractured his orbital bone. That's the brutal reality. But he could not break or fracture Inoue's spirit. This is the psychology of a true champion. I repeat, this is the psychology of a true champion. Experience is essential in life. Let me explain. Let's say you go to a job interview, and in this job interview, the first time you go for it, you lose your words, you stumble, and you miss your chance. But if you got a second shot at the job interview and you learned from your experience, you'd walk in sharper, stronger, and ultimately more prepared. Sometimes that's all it takes to decide the difference between winning and losing, the difference between getting the job or facing rejection, the difference between a close decision or a knockout. Now, with the rematch with Danair, this told the story of experience. A straight right with a short trajectory claimed the first knockdown in round 1, and a vicious left hook from Inoue introduced the beginning of the end in round 2. And let's give Danair some credit here. To stay standing after such a formidable punch says a lot about his character, and it shows that ultimately he's a true warrior. And of course, the ending was inevitable. And when one warrior dies, another one rises. In this sense, the torch was passed from one legend to another. And in one sense, they both shared a common anomaly. They were power punchers at lighter weights. When they punched, you could hear the force. It felt like punches from super middleweights or light heavyweights. You could feel the energy. That's power that transcends physical stature. Anyway, the victory cemented Inoue as the ring's pound for pound at the time. It was a significant victory, and it showed that he had a high level of excellence. Now, when you're undefeated, I would argue that your reality is different. You punch different, you move different, and your belief is on a different level. You have a different mindset. So when Inoue stepped up against Stephen Fulton, he walked straight into that psychology of belief. In one sense, Inoue was looking into a mirror. And you could ask yourself, what does a lion see when he stares at another lion? Does he see fear? Does he see competition? Or does he see just another lion? In this fight, Stephen held the WBO and he held the WBC titles. He was a real, solid, strong opposing force. So this battle showed the technical side of Inoue, because in the 8th round, Inoue's jab to the body wasn't just a weapon. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a trap. Because after that 3rd jab to the body came the thunderous, and I mean thunderous, right hand to the head. And just like that, it was over. Think of it like this. The jab to the body was a distraction from the knockout punch. That jab to the body, it was almost like the web. And the right hand, that was like the bite. In this context, Inoue wasn't just dominant. He was absolutely sensational. Because in the jungle, all the lions are strong. But at the same time, not all the lions are the same. In the end, Inoue is more than his knockouts. Because every moment where doubt tried to speak, he refused to listen. He believed in his ability. So in that sense, he walked through Donaire's fire and came out sharper. And that was a significant fire. He walked into Fulton's belief and showed him a higher level of reality. He moved up in weight, broke new champions, but never broke his own composure. This recipe is what makes him feel unstoppable. It's not just power, it's the control behind the power. And that's an important part of the equation. It's the discipline in his chaos, the patience, the absolute patience in his pressure, the silence in his confidence. Think of this. Some fighters win with size. Some fighters win with speed. Inoue wins with a mind that simply does not shake. Why? I think it's because he trusts his preparation. He trusts his timing. He trusts when the opening appears. He will see it, but more importantly, he will take it. Inoue just doesn't beat opponents. He takes away their belief. He takes away their resistance. He takes away their answers. Because in the end, boxing is not just about who hits harder. It's also about who refuses to break. And in a way, time and time again has showed us that he does not break. The psychology behind Terence Crawford's perfect record. Now, on this YouTube channel, I speak a lot about heart. I speak a lot about courage, and I speak a lot about purpose. But some people are so good, they don't have to display it, or they display it in a different way. Roy Jones, for example, was above all the competition. He was exceptional in the boxing ring. Let's give another example. Floyd Mayweather was exceptional in the boxing ring. Sugar Ray Robinson, he was absolutely exceptional in the boxing ring. And Crawford, he is exceptional in the boxing ring. Often greatness may not just be genetic. Often greatness is harnessed in great environments. And great environments, they can create great champions, while poor environments can destroy great minds. And I think that's a powerful point. And in a sense, I suspect that Crawford is not just genetically great. He's not just genetically great. He is a product of a great environment. He is a product of pressure, a product of honesty, of hard sparring, of hard lessons, and harder conversations. When your environment demands excellence, average becomes painful. And I believe that is why Crawford fights with a calmness that looks like destiny. In life, sometimes we need to change gears. In the corporate world, sometimes we need to work harder. We need to change the gear, because being in the same gear is simply not going to work. In the university world, sometimes we need to study more. We need to lock in, sacrifice the weekends. And in the boxing world, or in the boxing context, sometimes we need to increase the pressure, bite down, and walk through the fire. So when Crawford, when he fought Sean Porter, it really piqued my interest. I was always impressed by Sean Porter's intensity. His intensity, his pace, his realness, that stubborn refusal to back up. To me, he brought passion into the ring. So when he fought Crawford, it was like a real test, a test of composure, a test of timing, a test of gears. And in the 10th round, it was a test where a gear change was needed. And I believe it was a counter left uppercut. That was the start of the beginning. It really was. And with Crawford, The accuracy was just simply impeccable. He doesn't rush, he calculates. He's reading the chaos, then punishing the smallest mistakes. In this situation, he changed gears and the fight was stopped. And Crawford was a boxing master, and part of that mastery was mastering the gears. Now, in achieving excellence, think of it like this. Excellence by its very nature is rare. For example, not every student gets straight A's. That's exceptional, that is excellent. Not every student attends a Russell Group university. Not every chef is a Michelin star. So boxing operates, I would say, on the same premise. It operates on the same premise. There is good, great, and then there is exceptional and everything in between. Exceptional is the student who studies after everyone sleeps. Exceptional is the chess player who sees 5 moves ahead, while others only have the capacity to see one. Exceptional is the fighter who does the extra rounds when the gym is already empty. Exceptional is the chef who keeps improving a dish that everyone already loves. So when Crawford fought Spence, it was a pursuit of excellence. Both were exceptional. But the question was, who is more exceptional? Under the bright lights, Crawford showed an exemplary standard. The counter-punch uppercut in round 2 was kind of like a beautiful painting. It was a picture of absolute exceptional timing. And here is a question. How do you judge greatness? How do you judge it? In other words, how do you know when greatness has arrived? Well, when you make great fighters look ordinary, then perhaps that train has come. Because in essence, on that night, Crawford was the best on every single level. And as stated earlier, he was simply exemplary. Now, in today's culture, stoicism is a word that's kind of like thrown around. As with most philosophy, we hear words but rarely see the fruit of the labor, figuratively speaking. We like the quotes but don't always live the reality. I have no idea whether Crawford has ever read any stoicism. I have no idea whether he is aware of what stoicism is as a word. But I have seen what stoicism looks like when the lights are on and when he performs, because Crawford, in a simple sense, embodies a stoic mentality because he is so calm under pressure. He accepts his conditions and he does the job. He does the job in excellent fashion. He is calm, similar to Lennox Lewis, another calm pugilist. 2 men who turn chaos into something controlled. Here's another perspective. When Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, Horatio was a stoic character because he was solid, steady, a man who didn't break under pressure. Perhaps if Shakespeare were to write a boxing play today, Crawford would be his stoic protagonist. Because a man without fear, a man with acceptance, that's a man that's walking into the jungle that is prepared for battle, because he's stoic. He sharpens his tools and he studies the terrain and moves forward. While the emotional character worries, that distorts his preparation. But when you're calm and logical, you can see the problems. And this state of being, this state of stoicism, allows you to work out the solutions calmly. When we fear the problem, we create distortion and a lack of clarity because our emotions become our tools. But history shows us that this can be unreliable in life. Apparently, it takes 10,000 hours to create mastery. Now, the author Malcolm Gladwell spoke about this idea that repetition over time can turn effort. It can turn effort into excellence. Of course, there is context, and context is important. For example, those hours have to be focused and purposeful, not just time passed, but time invested. And being a master is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to see. Matter of fact, often it's an experience, something you feel. You notice the timing, the confidence in every single move. So when Canelo and Crawford agreed to the fight, this was the product of two masters in the boxing context, or should I say in the boxing ring. Many thought Crawford had aimed too high in this conquest. Yes, he had climbed the mountain before, but could he reach the stars? And on the night, it was another exemplary performance. He nullified the scary, scary right hand of Canelo, taking away the weapon most of his opponents feared. And Crawford put his punches together seamlessly, slipping, countering, stepping. And it was beautiful. The performance, in a simple sense, was a statement of boxing's oldest philosophy. Hit and don't be hit. A simple outcome on paper, but it takes mastery to do this to a legend like Canelo. And Crawford showed that he is a master of an extremely high level. When we talk about Crawford's perfect record, we're not just talking about numbers on a page. We're talking about a mindset, about a life philosophy, a man who married talent with pressure, chaos with calm. Because perfect records, they can be an illusion, because you can hide, you can avoid, you can play the maths. But Crawford did not hide. He walked towards the smoke every single time. He changed gears when the moment demanded. He accepted the pressure when the lights were the brightest. He trusted his preparation, and he trusted his heart in the moments that we cannot rehearse. Because perfection in boxing doesn't mean never getting hit. It means never losing yourself when you are hit. And there's a major distinction there. It means staying composed when the crowd roars, when doubt whispers, when the future feels heavy or could feel uncertain. Crawford's psychology is simple, but it's far from easy. Prepare like a student, fight like a master, stay calm like a stoic, and think like a chess player. Let your record be a reflection of your standards, not your excuses. And maybe that's a lesson for all of us. You don't need to be in the ring to chase that kind of excellence. Wherever your arena is, bring that calm courage, that commitment to your craft to reach your highest level.